We're so excited tonight. Crystal Sanford is here with us. Crystal is a local educational consultant, an IEP advocate, speech pathologist, and business owner. She's also an author, a podcaster, a cancer survivor, and a mother of an autistic tween. Crystal's passion is advocating alongside families, helping them to persistently pursue the supports that their children need at school. So we know you're going to want to hear what she has to share tonight, parents. So thank you for coming, Crystal.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really an honor to be here today.
You bet.
Yeah.
So we're going to let Crystal take it away with this presentation on IEP supports and specifically on creating a strength-based IEP.
Wonderful. I will share the slides. Is everyone able to see that okay? All righty. So, okay, great. So I'm really honored to be here this evening. I think it's awesome that Hope on the Hard Road exists for families to experience a space of hope. I think that it is a blessing that there is this group that creates this opportunity for us to be able to share and learn together as we're all on this journey together. So really glad to be here. So tonight we are going to discuss creating a strength-based IEP. And if you're not exactly familiar with that term, hopefully you will be by the time we're done today. Just a little information. Again, I'm Crystal Sanford, and information is for your informational purposes only as we share tonight. And we're going to dive a little bit into special education and its history. So if you have a child who is under 21 or under 18, likely they have an IEP. They have experienced special education to some degree. And this is really a young, it hasn't been around very long when it comes to special education. If you think about 1975, I have a sister who is 58 years old, older sister, and she has intellectual disabilities, and she was of an era where this was still new. The idea of a free and appropriate education. So IDEA in 1975 was enacted so that children who learned differently, who had disabilities, could receive an education at no cost to their families. Prior to that, you had to be a family of means to be able to afford a private school or tutor or teacher for your child who had needs. And besides that, maybe you just kept them at home if you didn't have the resources. So, and we were just coming out of, as a country, institutionalization, which was unfortunately what was happening to a lot of children, young adults. And so now, 1975, all children had access to an education. At no cost. So what IDEA allows is FAPE in the LRE. And I know especially if you've been in schools and meetings, you hear all these acronyms thrown around, but think about a free and appropriate education, FAPE, F-A-P-E, in the least restrictive environment, LRE. That really is the crux of special education and what the federal law was supposed to be in place for. What we see in my company, and as we've been navigating with families, is there's sometimes the disconnect around appropriate, that what is appropriate for one child versus another child. And then also, what is the least restrictive environment for a child? Sometimes parents have a certain perspective that their child should be in general education all day long with an aide, and schools say no, they should be in a separate environment. And so sometimes that is the sticking point. but both are supposed to be afforded to our children, FAPE and the LRE. And in California, services for children with special needs or unique needs continues through age 22 and a half. So we have additional time because the federal law says age 21. And after that age of 22 and a half, let's say our kiddos, maybe they have greater needs. They may go from a high school program to a transition program and finish that out from age 18 to 22 and a half. And then after that in California, the regional center typically kicks in. So we have a lot of things that are in place, and you know, as much as sometimes we look at special education now and feel like, oh, it's such a challenge, you know, it's just so hard. You got to think about prior to 1975, it was much, much harder. And so even from 75 until now, we've come a long way. So also knowing that our federal law, IDA, drives IEPs. That term is, you know, we use a lot, an IEP, an individualized education program. It's a meeting, an IEP meeting. It's a process, the IEP process where children are evaluated. So that's a term you, I'm sure, are familiar with, an IEP. An IEP, again, it's a meeting, a document. It outlines what specific educational services and supports a child requires in light of their unique needs. And that is different for every child. That's why it's individualized. You could have, for example, you know, 10 children on the autism spectrum, and each of them present very differently, and needs are unique, you know. So even twins, you know, research shows that even twins, both born, let's say, who are autistic, it can impact them differently. So every child's IEP should be in line with their unique needs. And the purpose of it is to prepare ultimately kids for further education, employment, and independent living. That is long-term where the IEP should help to take our children so that there is a smooth transition into adulthood. So that's a little bit of our history. Where are we now? And if you're a parent of a kiddo, like I said, you probably are aware that there is a big need and in some ways a bit of a disconnect in the services provided to our kiddos. So we're at a place right now where 15% of all children are being served under federal law IDA. And that's an increase from 13% a few years ago. So we're now at about 15%. Also, something that has changed fairly recently, the idea that not only should children receive a free and appropriate education in light of their unique needs, this specific set of services and supports that they need in the IEP should be allowing them to make progress. You know, novel idea, but you don't know how many times I've seen children have the same goals year after year and not making progress. So this U.S. Supreme Court case, the Andrew F. case in 2017, found that no longer was de minimis progress enough. That's in the Latin term, really meaning bare minimum. Before that, bare minimum progress was okay. But now, after this case, I like to state it as it says, to meet a substantive obligation under IDA, a school must offer an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress in light of their unique circumstances. So every child, regardless of their unique needs, should be on a course for making progress. And that should be something that is tangible, that we can document, that and data supports that. And if not, then we need to make some adjustments. Every child should also have challenging objectives that are in line with the standards. And I always say this, every child. Okay, so the child that has unique needs, Maybe they have, their genius IQ, they're in honors classes, but they have social skills that are, not great and they're struggling. That child with an IEP and the child who is non-speaking and still in diapers and is a teenager, that child and every child in between should still be making progress annually as we're marking these years of this IEP support. And so if we're not seeing that, there needs to be some adjustments to the IEP. And the law puts checks and balances in place so that we can make those adjustments as needed. So what solutions have been tried when it comes to supporting our kids in schools? For some of our kids, maybe they have some sensory needs, maybe they have sensory supports, headphones, fidgets. Maybe for some kids, they have been recommended to be in a separate setting. So maybe they're in a special education classroom most of the day. Speech therapy, I've been speech therapist, although I've hung up that hat as of this year, but speech therapy is often a resource, a related service that kiddos have access to. If they have social needs or language needs, if they are minimally speaking, maybe they have a communication device. Occupational therapy is also a related service sometimes that is provided for kids who have sensory needs, again, fine motor skills, challenges with that, self-help skills. Maybe social stories, maybe punitive consequences. I always hate to see that implemented. A lot of times our kiddos who have ADHD, they lose their recess, or because they blurted out, or because they were impulsive, because they were being who they neurologically are, they get penalized. That's so unfortunate and so against what our federal law says. It actually says that we should use positive behavior supports. But these are some things that schools have tried. And again, I don't knock schools. I'm not anti-schools. And I say the school is not our enemy. We know who our enemy is, as those people of faith. But the schools and the system is unfortunately overloaded and not well equipped or arranged and supported in a way that all children are getting access to the education they deserve. I mean, it's just what it is. It's been like that for some years. As the amount of children needing support has increased, the amount of supports for them has not kept up with that. So these are some things that have been tried. What I'm here to talk about for really the majority of our time is another alternative. And this really just aligns so well with, Hope on the Hard Road and the idea of hope. There is hope. And, I believe every child can learn, and every child should have access to the tools they require to be able to learn. And so another solution for our kids is considering a strength-based IEP and developing that for them. So I love quotes, I love words. And so here is one quote. When we build on our strengths and daily successes, instead of focusing on our failures, we simply learn more. And that's by Tom Roth. He's a researcher, engagement consultant, does a lot of work in the business arena. And I think that is so true. When we build on our strengths, we have God-given strengths. Every human being does. All of our children do. They have specific interests and things that motivate them. As we build on those in our daily successes, we win. Our motivation is there, and kids will learn more if we can have this emphasis on their strengths. So if we think about the typical IEP, it's unfortunately really more deficits based than anything. We have to talk about all the things that the child can't do. And, in the present level section of the IEP, we talk about reading, writing, math, and, behavior, communication, all these areas. And there's often just such a focus on what they can't do, what's not working. Really surface level attention is given to the idea of their strengths, their interests, their preferences. And if you look back at your child's IEP, there's a section in one of the first couple of pages there on that present levels page where we're supposed to list the child's strengths, interests, preferences, learning styles. And we honestly, most of the time we just maybe spend a couple minutes there and move on, or sometimes they just really skip past that. And that is what I'm going to talk about today, the idea of staying in that moment and talking about those strengths and using those strengths as a springboard to help our children do the things that are a little bit harder. So what's a strength-based IEP? And again, you can look it up. I mean, it's probably in the past, I'd say 12 to 15 years, there's been more and more research in the area of, guiding by our strengths, focusing on children's strengths who are neurodiverse or whose brains, operate a little bit differently. And I feel like this is something, a passion of mine. I feel like God's really put on my heart to be able to go ahead and speak more about the idea of focusing on our children's strengths. So this is, a quote just from myself in defining this. There's so many multiple definitions of this topic, but in a nutshell, I would say identifying a student's strengths and building on those to facilitate success in all their areas of need. And that is a strength-based IEP. So in a strength-based IEP, we're focusing on the student's strengths, on what they can do, on their abilities, their learning styles. We're not, all 100% comparing them to, their peers and what they cannot do. We are starting from the point of what they can do and what comes natural and easy to them. And then we explain their challenges in more of a matter-of-fact way, using really objective language. I think that unfortunately teams sometimes use language that is subjective, that is very, takes on their perspective of the child, for better or for worse, versus really being more matter of fact. So, I was at a meeting earlier this year and a case manager shared, well, we're talking about the student. Well, he's manipulative. And you can only imagine how myself, they are supporting the parent, and I, we had to quickly step in and say, and I shared, the idea of using the term manipulative has such negative connotations. And could it be that this child is using his skills in a creative way to solve a problem instead of using a term like manipulative? And so again, yes, we're not saying kids are perfect. We're not saying every child is going to, go to college or even needs to go to college or whatnot. And we know that some of our children have needs. Our children have needs that are diverse, but there's a way to explain that and not live in that, and still using their strengths to help to, again, springboard them into growth in areas of need. So the strength-based IEP also gives students more of an active role, really builds their self-advocacy and agency, which is what we want for all kids, disability or not. Asking the child, I've said this to teams. They're like, well, parent, they say to the parent, well, what does he like to do? Or well, what is it that motivates him? And if I'm at the meeting with the parent, I'll say, have you asked the child? Novel idea. And it could be a child maybe that, has some difficulty communicating. There are still ways to engage the child, ask them, observe them, monitor, talk to people that know the child well, so that we can develop this more of a holistic approach to their IEP. And in the strength-based IEP, we are looking at what they can do now and what we want them to do next, and using what they can do now to help them get there. So, again, I love words. I'm a research nerd. I'm not going to stay on this for too long, but this reference is here to Elder Rude and Damiani in an article that they wrote about writing strength-based IEPs for students with disabilities in the inclusive classroom. And I pulled this from their article because I love this real life example of what a strength-based IEP would look like. So this top section just talks about the kinds of things we would typically see. So the student is Franklin, right? So he's a second grader. We're talking about his labels, his disabilities, what he has trouble doing, difficulty staying on task, hard time comprehending. We get that. And we need to share that, but is there a way to share that really honors who the child is? Let's look at the second example here in the lighter blue. Franklin's a friendly young boy who enjoys trains and tall buildings. He's hardworking. He enjoys attending school. Man, doesn't that just change the atmosphere? If you can imagine a team talking about your child in this way, can you imagine if you're, let's say it's an older child that's actually attending the IEP, wouldn't that just change their perspective, even of themselves, to hear themselves talked about in such a positive light? We're not denying that Franklin doesn't have challenges. We say here, Franklin has labels of intellectual disability and ADHD that affect him academically, but we're giving details and we're just sharing it in a matter-of-fact way. This makes it harder for him to focus. Okay, it explains it more than just the labels. Well, what do the labels look like for Franklin? Okay, his unique needs are that he has difficulty comprehending, focusing, throughout a lesson. That's meaningful information that the next teacher or person that picks up that IEP can read it and use that as they're developing instruction for Franklin. So I love this. And a strength-based IEP is definitely going to be much more wordy, but it's going to give more meat and meaning to anyone that picks it up. And it goes on to say things that he enjoys. He enjoys and excels in math. Let's talk about the things that Franklin, are going well for him. Things that go well, like the kinds of problems he's able to solve, the kinds of problems he's working on, the kinds of tools that help him. Again, these all pieces of information that could be super supportive for a team as they're developing an IEP, an individualized program for this student. So hopefully you can see the example of how powerful a strength-based IEP can be for a student. So as we're wrapping up here, what are 3 things you can do as a parent to foster a strength-based IEP for your child? I always want to leave people with actionable steps, tools for tomorrow, right? If I'm just sitting here blabbing and you can't leave with something you can do tomorrow, then what good is it, right? So I want to honor your time and share these tools and tips with you. The first tip is maximizing the parent concerns section. And I talked about the IEP document. Part of it is called present levels of performance. Okay, and so like I said, at the top there usually is student strengths, interests, preferences, but right under that often is the parent concerns section. Sometimes it's referred to in other ways. That's a space also that I think is not maximized or used well all the time. I encourage families to update this annually because our children are ever, evolving, changing, growing. Every child is, but especially our kiddos who have needs. Maybe something that was an issue last year isn't an issue this year, or vice versa. So updating your concerns annually, using it as your vision statement. I really encourage you to do that. Just like the Bible says, right? Without a vision, the people perish. Write the vision, make it plain, and they that read it can run with it. I think it's really important to use this section as your parent concerns, a way to share with the team who you see your child to be, who they see themselves to be, and giving the team an example and ideas and tips that can support them. And I do this every year for my own kiddos. I have two children. One is autistic, the other one has some different needs, but both of them have an IEP. And every year, my parent concern section, I talk about, this is, so and so. She is interested in this, that, or whatever it is, space, cooking, water play, statistics. What works well for her is giving her information ahead of time, explaining to her the reason for doing tasks, things that we're working on at home are, her ability to, attend to tasks, whatever it is. And then I add in there, in the future, my child wants to, become a chef. And so that, again, these kinds of things can be really woven into the IEP. If you know a child wants to be a chef, then you can use the idea of cooking and math and cooking and bringing in examples that have to do with food and those kinds of culinary things into the kinds of assignments they do, into the kinds of, activities that they do. And won't you get much more motivation if you're tying it to something that they're interested in? And then lastly, I encourage families to add their best contact information there. So I'll end up with, we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with the IEP team annually. And the best way to contact us is via email. And I put it in there. And that statement lives in the parent concerns, and anyone can reference that. And that helps to support the team as they have questions or, are reviewing her IEP throughout the year. So maximize your parent concerns section, your opportunity to share your vision for your child. Number 2, encourage the team to integrate person-centered planning. So person-centered planning is something that most teams will do with your child once they turn 16. They're required to interview and find out about your child's interests, what they want to do in the future, because at age 16, they have to add something called a transition plan, an individualized transition plan to their IEP, so that they're documenting how they're helping your child prepare for the future. And I worked in high schools for 4 years. I worked 10 years in middle school, and then the rest of the time was elementary and preschool. But I took that from my experience in high school with those 16-year-olds, and as now as an advocate, I realized how important that is for every child. We should be thinking about what are their interests. We should be asking them and finding ways to find out what are their strengths, interests, learning styles. There are ways that your IEP team can do that with your child, regardless of the age, and then use that information, weaving it into the treatment plan, into the goals, the materials. I mean, I tell you, if you got a kid that's, a kindergartner and they're into Thomas the Train, put Thomas the Train on every worksheet you want them to do, especially if you have kids who are struggling with pencil and paper tasks. Well, they might do it if they see Thomas on there and they're into that. So that's just one example. And so you can discuss with your team, how are you integrating my child into their IEP? They can use, interviews with you if it's a child that has more needs and isn't able to communicate as well. They can interview, or you can share information from your private therapist if your child has some. They can interview the child themselves if the child has that ability. So I think this is really important because we need, especially before they get into middle school, I want to say about 8th grade, the older the child gets, school continues to get harder and harder. And it takes extra work, extra effort. We're seeing this for our child. She's in 7th grade this year, and it's harder than it was last year in 6th grade. And she's having to work a little bit harder, and she's trying to, make her wrap her brain around that. And so potentially learning new information, multiple classes. The rigor is only going to get harder. And so we can keep them motivated. We can keep them seeing themselves in their IEP, seeing that this extra support is going to help them get to their future goals, then that's going to keep them wanting to participate, and it's going to serve them well. If I worked in middle school, like I said, and if I knew a kid was, what they wanted to be when they grew up, well, I want to be a YouTuber. Oh, great. Or I want to write or create video games. So the things that a lot of the boys, say in middle school. All right. If you want to get to point B, which is, creating video games, how are you going to get there? Well, I tell you what, any of the things I was going to, not any, but often the tools I'd use in therapy, I would make sure I could somehow point it to, and this skill we're working on is going to help you when you are working for Apple or that app company or whatever in the future, building video games. And man, oh, well, then this is important. If that's the case, right? I could see their eyes kind of perk up because I tied it to something that had meaning to them. And teams can do this as well. All right, so our last tip for you is weaving the strengths into the goals themselves. All right, we've talked about how teams can get information from our kids, finding out from you, from other caregivers, other therapists, what are the child's strengths, interests, preferences, and then really adding that to the goals themselves. So you want to start with a SMART goal. A SMART goal is it's an acronym that is, SMART, it refers to a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or reasonable, and time bound. But really looking at a goal that is measurable and has some kind of time component so that we know, the beginning and the ending of it is what you want to look for in your child's goals. So starting at that point, okay, making sure, because I've seen some goals that are really just, broad, Maria will improve her math skills. Well, what in the world is that? I mean, math skills encompass so many things at so many different ages and grade levels. So specific would be, well, Maria will successfully complete 10 word problems involving multiplication. Okay, now we're getting specific, and now we can measure that. We know it's 10. We're expecting her to get 8 out of 10 correct across 3 trials. Okay, now there's some time, component to that. That's the kind of thing you want to look for in your child's goals. And then on top of that, using their abilities and interests to lead toward the progress. So here's an example here. A student will employ their love of statistics and math facts to complete 10 grade level math word problems with 80% accuracy as measured by observation and teacher records. Okay, and this is not one of my kids' goals, but my oldest, she loves statistics. She loves sports statistics. She can tell you who's out, who's injured, who had whatever score this week versus next week. I mean, it's football season and she's all over it, and so I've told her, do you know you can get a job doing that? I've said, and think about your child when I talk about their strengths and interests, because that can lend itself toward their future. I told her, you could work for ESPN. You love sports statistics. You can research it all day long and you can give that information to the commentators and they'll pay you to do that. And she's like, wow, that's amazing, So again, if you have a kiddo who's into statistics or math facts, let's add that to the goal of having them do the thing you want them to do that they need some help on, which is completing math word problems. And for a lot of our kiddos, whenever you add a language component to the math, that's when it gets harder. So tying what they love to something that may be a little bit more challenging is where you're going to get more bang for your buck. So weaving their strengths right into those goals. Now, I tell you, you may get some, I don't want to say pushback. This is something maybe your teams have never attempted to do or considered or heard of, but I tell you, encourage them to try. Everything can be a trial with the IEP. if you propose, I'd like to see us design the IEP goals with my child's strengths and interests in mind, and let's trial them for a semester or 6 weeks or a progress reporting period. And let's see if we see growth and progress and come back to the table before we say no, right? Because the teams are like, we don't do that here, or, we can't do that. Yes, you can. Let's try it. Let's try it for 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 3 months, and then come back to the table and then let the data speak for itself. So that if I don't know, that just came to me. If you do get any pushback, that's one way to address that. So our 3 big ideas that we shared so far were, again, maximizing that parent concern section, really developing your vision statement for your child, encouraging the team to use person-centered planning and involving the child as much as they can into the development of the IEP. And then weaving their strengths and interests right into those goals. This can really be supportive. And I say this as an advocate, as someone who's been in the field for a while, but tonight I say it to you as a parent, because again, I have kiddos, and we literally just did this with my oldest daughter earlier this year when she had her 3-year evaluation. And the team, it was beautiful. We talked about she's interested in flags of the countries. She knows every flag for almost every country. Oh, that's great. We're having a multicultural fair this year. Maybe we can get her to help us, create some of the flags. I mean, it was beautiful. Just by giving the team these ideas, they were able to see ways to help foster this strength-based IEP. So you really may be surprised, just giving your team the opportunity to develop this IEP in this way can lead to maybe some changes for your child and other children as well on their caseloads. So we've shared again about the strength-based IEP, a little bit about what it is and tips that you can use. And I hope that this was supportive for you. I believe now we're going to have time for just in a moment a Q&A. But my last thoughts I wanted to share were this. Again, the IEP, it's a document, it's a process. It should be designed with children's unique needs in mind. And again, every child, regardless of their needs, they do have specific strengths. And these strengths can be supported well through that intentional connection with you and the school. And that strength-based IEP really can help to, it's paramount. I think it's really paramount in seeing our children grow and stay connected and continue to make progress. So I hope that was helpful, and my information you'll be able to get later. But families, you are not crazy. Your child can succeed. You're on the right track. Blessings to you for coming here on a Monday night, and you've got what it takes, and so does your child.
We are so thankful again for Crystal, and reach out to her group if you have any questions or need any help in your IEPs coming up. She's in the San Diego area and just an invaluable resource. So again, I'm Kristen. This is Eric Freund. We are co-founders of Hope on the Hard Road. We do this parent support group every second Monday on Zoom. It makes it easy. You can have your kiddo in bed or come and go as you need to. We also do things that support the moms. We have a mom's monthly meetup here in the county and a dad's meetup. We do annual events, we do marriage events, single parent events, things like that. So just wrapping around the family because we are one. So we have a 19-year-old, almost 20-year-old with autism diagnosis and developmental delays. So we get it. And we just want to be here to support, and started a nonprofit in order to do that to a larger extent. So again, we love our partners. Crystal, you're amazing. This was fabulous. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope it was helpful, valuable information for the families, and hope everybody has a great night.